Most parents think that agreeing to joint custody means peace, fairness, stability. But what if I told you that accepting joint custody without absolute clarity is one of the fastest ways to end up trapped in endless legal disputes, bitter arguments, and emotional exhaustion? Not just for you, but for your child too. The truth is, the phrase joint custody sounds simple, but it hides a mess of legal gray areas that most people don't find out about until it's too late. And by then, you're stuck in a situation where every holiday becomes a debate, every doctor's appointment is a battleground, and your child is caught in the middle of it all. If you're watching this, there's a good chance you, or someone you care about, is either in the middle of a custody agreement, about to sign one, or already dealing with the fallout of one that was too vague. You might think, we'll figure it out as we go, or we're on good terms now, it won't be a problem. But when emotions shift, circumstances change, or new partners enter the picture, suddenly that flexible agreement becomes a weapon, and the court becomes your second home. In this video, we're breaking down the 6 most common blind spots that people overlook when they accept joint custody without demanding clarity. These aren't just legal mistakes, they're emotional landmines that quietly destroy co-parenting relationships and stretch out court battles for years. You'll learn why one word left undefined can unravel everything, how vague scheduling ruins your freedom, and what happens when parenting styles clash with no structure to fall back on. Stay with me until the end, because you'll walk away with specific, powerful questions to ask, and clauses to demand, before you sign anything. This might be the most important parenting decision you'll ever make. Let's get into it. It starts off harmless. You agree to alternate weekends, split holidays, or maybe even something as open-ended as 50-50 time. At first, it feels flexible, like you're being reasonable. But what nobody tells you is that vague scheduling is a time bomb. It seems peaceful in the beginning, but once routines settle and lives move forward, the cracks start to show, and fast. Picture this. It's the start of the school year, and both parents want to take the child school shopping. Who gets the final say? Who decides whose weekend that falls on? What about when one parent gets offered a better job that slightly changes their schedule? What if grandma wants to visit from out of town, but it overlaps with your time, and there's no clear way to resolve it? Suddenly, you're not co-parenting. You're negotiating. Constantly. Every single week. And here's the worst part. Judges don't want to micromanage your calendar after the agreement is signed. If the schedule is vague, you're the one stuck figuring it out. Over text. Over email. Sometimes through lawyers. And each minor disagreement begins to chip away at whatever trust you had left with your ex. One mother said the phrase, reasonable parenting time, was the biggest mistake she ever agreed to. Why? Because what's reasonable to her wasn't reasonable to him. And since the agreement didn't define specifics, like pickup times, transportation, holiday rotations, or even how sick days are handled, they spent more time arguing than parenting. This is where resentment starts to grow. One parent starts feeling like the other is controlling the schedule. The other feels like they're constantly compromising. And in the middle of it all is the child. Confused, disappointed, or worse, used as leverage. If you're even thinking about agreeing to joint custody, ask yourself this. Are you okay with negotiating every little thing for the next 10 years? Or would you rather spell it out now while you still can? Because once the ink is dry, every ambiguity becomes an argument. And the person who suffers most from vague scheduling? It's not you. It's your child. Most parents hear joint legal custody and assume it means shared decision-making. Equal say in things like schooling, healthcare, and religion. Sounds fair, right? But here's the trap. If your agreement doesn't clearly define how those decisions get made or what happens when you disagree, you're setting yourself up for years of bitter conflict. Let's say your child needs surgery. One parent thinks it's necessary. The other says it's too risky. Now what? Or maybe one of you wants to enroll the child in a private school that's across town, but the other refuses to deal with the commute. With no tiebreaker clause, no defined areas of authority, and no method for resolving deadlocks, you're stuck. And when you're stuck, guess who gets involved? Lawyers. Courts. Judges who don't know your child. This isn't just about inconvenience. It's about control. Because whoever is more aggressive, whoever has more money or more time to fight, can dominate the process. They delay responses. They threaten court action. They use decision-making ambiguity as a way to stall, pressure, or manipulate. And all of this happens while important choices for your child are frozen in place. Even worse, some parents start using decision-making disputes as a weapon. Want to take your child to therapy? They'll say no, just to frustrate you. Want to switch pediatricians? They'll block it, just to make a point. And unless your agreement includes clear boundaries, like assigning one parent primary decision-making in specific areas or requiring mediation before legal action, you'll be forced to fight for every inch. This is why experienced divorce attorneys always recommend a decision-making structure in writing. Not just joint, but who decides what happens when you can't agree, and whether certain things require written consent. Because without that, you're not co-parenting, you're competing. And your child ends up in the middle of a power struggle that has nothing to do with their best interest and everything to do with control. On paper, splitting time 50-50 seems like the fairest path. It sounds modern, balanced, even optimistic. Two parents, equally involved. But what nobody tells you is that without specifics, a 50-50 schedule can become a constant tug of war, filled with last-minute changes, endless texting, and the slow breakdown of trust. Why? Because equal time means nothing if the logistics aren't locked down. Are you alternating weeks? Doing a 2-2-3 rotation? Switching every Friday? Who's handling pickups and drop-offs? What happens when a holiday overlaps? If your custody agreement just says joint physical custody without mapping out those details, it becomes a free-for-all, and every small decision turns into an argument. Imagine trying to plan a work trip, a vacation, or even a simple dinner with friends, and not knowing if your ex will suddenly demand a schedule change. Now multiply that stress by years. That's what happens when the agreement lacks precision. Even parents who start off cooperative can grow resentful when boundaries aren't respected or expectations constantly shift. And here's the quiet danger. One parent starts counting minutes. I had her for 13 days this month, and you only had 11. Suddenly, parenting becomes math. Children are no longer seen as people. They're split into blocks of time, and every handoff becomes a negotiation. Worse, when communication breaks down or new relationships enter the picture, any flexibility you once had vanishes. Your ex gets remarried, moves farther away, changes jobs. And now that informal custody arrangement you once thought was fine? It's a disaster. You're scrambling to enforce rules that were never actually written down. That's why a rock-solid parenting time schedule is non-negotiable. Not just to avoid conflict, but to protect your time, your sanity, and your child's sense of stability. Because in the chaos of a vague custody plan, it's the child who ends up feeling like a suitcase. Always packed, passed, and pulled between two homes. A detailed schedule isn't about control. It's about consistency. And in a post-divorce world, consistency is everything. Most people hear the term joint custody and assume it means shared time. But there's another layer. One that causes more legal battles than almost anything else. It's called legal custody. And if your divorce agreement doesn't spell out exactly how decisions are made, you might be signing up for years of disputes you never saw coming. Legal custody determines who gets to make the big calls about school, medical care, religion, and anything that shapes your child's future. In many agreements, it's listed as joint legal custody. But here's the problem. What happens when you disagree? Let's say one parent wants private school, and the other insists on public. Or one believes in a specific medical treatment, and the other refuses. If your agreement just says joint legal custody, but doesn't include a method for resolving disagreements, guess what happens? You end up back in court. Every single time. Even worse, some parents learn too late that their joint status actually gives their ex more power than they realized. Maybe the other parent has final decision-making authority after consulting. That sounds harmless, until you discover that consulting just means a quick email before they make the decision anyway. This isn't just frustrating. It's dangerous. One parent could switch doctors, enroll the child in a different school, or even take them to a therapist without your consent, and unless your agreement blocks it clearly, there's little you can do. That's why a strong custody agreement doesn't just say who shares decisions. It defines how those decisions get made. Do you need to agree? Does one parent decide for certain areas, like health or education? What's the process if you reach a deadlock? Mediation? Arbitration? Court? Because without answers to those questions, joint legal custody becomes a battlefield disguised as fairness. The goal isn't just to share power. It's to share it in a way that protects your child and prevents endless conflict. And that only happens when the rules are spelled out from day one. Most people assume that if time is split 50-50, then so are the expenses. But the truth? Joint custody doesn't mean joint responsibility, unless your agreement says so in black and white. And if you don't spell out the financial terms, what starts as shared custody can quietly become a one-sided financial burden you never saw coming. Here's how it happens. You both agree to split time equally, thinking it'll be fair. But then your child needs braces, or school supplies, or a last-minute camp deposit. And suddenly, you're paying out of pocket, again and again, because the agreement didn't say who covers what. Even basic expenses get confusing. Who pays for clothes if they go back and forth? Who pays for field trips, tutors, or extracurriculars? If your child plays soccer on your ex's time, but the league fee is due on your time, who's responsible? Without a clear plan, you're stuck either chasing reimbursements or swallowing the cost to avoid another fight. Worse, some parents use this gray area as a weapon. They claim they can't afford it or didn't agree to that purchase, even when it's for something essential. If your agreement doesn't include cost-sharing terms, or at least a dispute process, you have almost no leverage. And going to court over a few $100s? It's emotionally draining and rarely worth it. Even child support can be misleading. Many assume 50-50 custody means no support is paid, but courts still factor in income differences, healthcare premiums, and parenting costs. If the agreement doesn't clearly define how support is calculated and what it covers, one parent often ends up footing most of the bill, while the other avoids financial accountability. That's why a rock-solid custody plan doesn't stop at time. It breaks down money. It outlines how medical costs are split, who covers education, what counts as a shared expense, and how disputes are resolved. Because if you leave money vague, resentment builds fast. And in the end, the only person who truly suffers is the child caught in the middle of the financial fallout. At first, custody schedules seem simple. Week on, week off. Or maybe split weekends with alternating holidays. But what most people don't realize is that a vague or overly rigid schedule can lead to years of confusion, resentment, and non-stop arguments. Because if your divorce agreement doesn't cover the what-ifs, then every school break, summer vacation, or unexpected change becomes a fight waiting to happen. Here's the reality. Life doesn't run on a perfect calendar. Kids get sick. Parents change jobs. Schools close early. And unless your custody plan is built to handle those real-life disruptions, you'll end up in a constant tug-of-war. Can you swap this weekend? Becomes a loaded question. What time is pickup? Turns into a power struggle. And suddenly, co-parenting feels like navigating a minefield. The biggest mistake? Leaving too much to verbal agreement. In the beginning, both parents might be cooperative. But when new partners, work stress, or old resentments creep in, flexibility disappears, and without clear written guidelines, there's nothing to fall back on but court orders and text message battles. Another common trap is having a rigid schedule that doesn't age well with your child. What works for a toddler, short, frequent exchanges, can become chaos for a teenager juggling sports, friends, and school. If your agreement doesn't include a review clause or age-appropriate adjustments, you're setting yourself up for major conflict as your child grows. Then there are holidays, birthdays, vacations. Without clear details, like who picks up, what time, where, and how long, every special occasion turns into a negotiation. And the stress doesn't just affect you. Kids pick up on the tension. They start dreading handoffs. And they learn to walk on eggshells, just to keep the peace. That's why a smart custody agreement doesn't just say, joint custody. It builds a real-world parenting plan. One that includes contingencies, communication rules, review periods, and flexibility with structure. Because the goal isn't just fairness on paper. It's peace in practice. And if your schedule isn't designed to adapt, it will eventually break. Not just for you, but for everyone involved. Looking back, agreeing to joint custody might seem like the cooperative thing to do. But without clarity, it can quietly become one of the most draining, emotionally exhausting decisions you ever make. From communication breakdowns to never-ending calendar battles, vague agreements don't just create confusion. They open the door to conflict that can drag on for years. And what gets lost in all of it? Your peace of mind, your child's stability, and your ability to move forward. That doesn't mean joint custody is bad. In fact, when done right, with specifics, flexibility, and structure, it can be one of the healthiest setups for a child. But only if it's carefully designed with the future in mind. Because once the agreement is signed, changing it can be slow, expensive, and often painful. So if you're in the middle of this decision, or helping someone who is, don't settle for a handshake and hope. Ask the hard questions now. Think beyond just this year. And above all, remember that a good custody plan isn't about winning or fairness in the moment. It's about building something that actually works when real life gets messy. And if you're already in a tough custody situation and wondering if it's too late, don't give up. Start by documenting issues, revisiting your agreement, and if needed, speak to someone who can help you modify the terms before things spiral. If this video gave you something to think about, something you hadn't considered before, leave a comment below and share one insight you're walking away with. Your voice matters, and you never know who might be reading and feel a little less alone after seeing your words. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. We cover the things most people avoid talking about, but the ones that often matter most. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.